We're talking today with Jeff Stam of Hudsonville, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now Jeff, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Okay. I'm from Holland, Michigan, born and bred there in Holland. Went to schools there and really never left the area until I went into the military.
Okay. What was your family doing for a living when you were growing up?
My dad was, well, I should say my stepdad. I was raised in a rather dysfunctional, broken family.
Okay.
And he worked as a day laborer, and my mom worked as a day laborer in a factory.
Okay. Now, did you finish high school?
Finished high school and followed my two older siblings, my two older brothers' examples, almost immediately out of high school. Kind of escaped our environment by going into the military.
Okay. Now, so when do you actually join the service?
I joined the service probably about 7 or 8 months after I graduated, so it was in January of '69.
Okay. And what did you do in between? Did you have a job someplace, or?
I did. I was actually supposed to start college the same day I went into the military.
Okay.
And I had some odd jobs in between, kind of trying to figure out for sure what I was going to do. I was going to go into service under the buddy plan, but my buddy backed out at the last minute.
Okay. So you're joining, and you chose the Army to join specifically?
I did.
Okay, and now you're going into the Army, 1969. I mean, Vietnam has heated up a good deal. There's protests going on. There's stuff on the news. How much were you aware of at the time you signed up?
Is on the news. I was somewhat aware. I was a teenager, so I wasn't that terribly aware of current events. Also, most teenagers think they're indestructible, so I wasn't that worried about the risk. However, I did enlist because I was told that I could choose my occupation, my MOS.
Mm-hmm.
And it was true, it didn't work out as I'd planned.
All right. So then once you go and sign up, basically take us through the process. You enlist, now what happens to you?
Well, I enlisted. I signed up for as a radio teletype, actually RTL. But you eventually to go to radio teletype, but you had to qualify for that. Also with the intention of going to OCS, which I qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a different background story. I ended up choosing not to accept that slot.
Okay. All right. Now, did they send you for a physical?
Yes.
Okay, where'd you go for that?
Detroit.
Okay. Now, sometimes there are stories about people trying to scam the system or other things when they go to the physical, or weird stuff happening. What was your experience like?
I remember overhearing guys talking about trying to do that when we were there. There were people out there for physical because they had received a draft notice,
right,
and they weren't wanting to go in. But the buddy I was intending to go in was actually there for the physical with me.
Mm-hmm.
So we were both still on the same page then. And remembering this is going to be different, but not terribly different than what I expected.
Okay. And now, how serious was the physical? I mean, do you think they were actually pulling people out who had physical problems, or were you all getting through?
I had heard of people getting pulled out for physical problems, but it didn't seem like the physical was too terribly deep. And,
okay.
You know, one case in point would be the hearing. And they kept on doing it until you heard it.
Okay. All right. Now, after the physical, do you go home and then report, or do they pack you off to basic
no,
training?
after the physical, we went home, and I don't remember how long the period of time between was. But
okay. So where do they send you now for basic training?
basic training, I went on to Fort Knox.
Okay, that's in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What kind of reception do you get when you arrive there?
That's when you learn and you first begin to wonder if you're enlisted, did I make a mistake?
Mm-hmm.
And because you are no longer a human being, you're, the drill sergeants. And my situation is a little bit different. My brother was stationed at Fort Knox.
Okay.
He was a captain at the time, and a bit upset that I enlisted without getting his advice first, because he would have advised me against it.
Okay. All right. But were the instructors aware that your brother was an officer, or?
After a while, they became aware because he had visited the barracks I didn't notice that it made any kind of difference at all or anything. It took probably a few weeks before I actually got any kind of a pass and I was able to see them.
Okay. Now, what did the actual training consist of?
Typically, because it was winter time, I think it was probably a little bit easier than it normally would have been in terms of a lot of outside PT and long marches and that stuff. We had some of that, but a lot of just getting into shape, trying to change you psychologically, they were not above playing games with us about the Vietnam thing. You know, one case in point, the drill sergeant pretended he had somebody come up to him and give him a very important memo or announcement or something, and he said something about we just entered into the war officially because it was undeclared at the time, and all of you will be going to Vietnam and that type of thing. And afterwards we found out it was BS. He told us that. And they're trying to get us to realize how realistic the situation could be.
Okay. Now, were some of your instructors people who had been in Vietnam?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I just assumed so, but I'm not positive about that.
Okay. So they weren't telling you that if that was the case. They were just these people who were telling you what to do.
They may have mentioned that. I don't recall.
Okay. All right. Did you notice if there were any kind of junior level instructors who were kind of fresh out of NCO school? Were there any shake and bake sergeants there?
No, at the time I wasn't aware of where shake and bake was, and it seemed to me that they all had some type of experience.
Okay. All right. And now, were you in good shape physically when you went in?
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't say so.
So was that kind of a challenge to get into shape like the Army wanted?
Well, not really. I did okay with my PT. I was tall. I was skinny. I'd been an athlete in cross country and track, but I wasn't buff or anything. I was a skinny kid.
But you were in shape like you were physically
Enough
healthy
to
and
get
you had
through
some
the program. I didn't struggle with the program.
Okay. And how about the discipline part? Was that easy or hard to adjust to?
That was not, the discipline wasn't bad. Being screamed at a lot for no reason, just a pain in the neck, but I realized it was temporarily, and they put up with that.
Okay. Now, when people screwed up in training, would they be punished individually, or would the whole unit get punished? Or?
It'd be both.
Okay.
So you want to be careful you didn't screw up, because others would bear the ramifications of that.
Okay. All right. So how long was the basic training?
It should have been 8 weeks. I had a medical issue in the middle of it.
Oh. Okay.
So because of it, I missed some time. So I got shifted to another unit, the complete basic, which turned out to be better. To me, it was a much better unit. It seemed like the people in charge were better. The barrack situation was quite a bit different, and I automatically got out of it with my first stripe. So
okay.
things just worked out a little bit better.
So what makes it better? I mean, what was different about the two?
Well, we had 4 to a room rather than 50 to a big barracks room. We weren't in the old wooden barracks that were supposed to be torn down 20 years before, coal heated type of thing. And also the drill instructor seemed a little bit more, probably not sympathetic, but at least empathetic.
Okay.
To the situation, so he wasn't unnecessarily all over our case. Seemed like he was trying to help us out.
Okay.
So that made it better.
All right. And then once you finish that, what's your next step?
My MOS training, which was down in Fort Gordon, Georgia.
Okay.
And at that time, everything was kind of up in the air because my brother was trying to help me make a shift to become a chaplain's assistant rather than the MOS I had chosen, because that option I wasn't aware of, wasn't presented to me.
Right.
And we were looking at that possibility, and that did not work out. So I went to my MOS training down in Fort Gordon.
Okay. So that's basically radio school.
Right.
Okay. Now you'd mentioned initially that you were considering going into officer candidate school. At what point did you give up on that, or where in the story does that fall?
probably when I completed my MOS, then I qualified for advanced MOS. And as you qualify, if you're at a certain rank in your class, you're getting automatic rank. So I was already at an E4 status, and my goal was to make rank because I had a honey back home that I wanted to marry. I wanted to be making enough money to be able to do that, to have a family. Again, because of I had a death in the family, so again, got set back. In my class date for OCS kept getting changed. So I was in a holdover status after I finally finished my training. I was in a holdover status waiting for a new class date. And my brother, who had made rank of captain in less than 3 years, had never left Fort Knox, had an easygoing advice very strongly against going to OCS. He just, kind of, at least what I was hearing from him was it wasn't worth it.
Yeah. Well.
And based on that, and based on the surety, because of I was now not in RTO, but Rio teletype, that a lot of people were going over to Europe. I said, okay, I'll go there. I don't want to spend more time in unit. I got my rank out.
Yeah. And if you did become an officer, then you had a longer service obligation at the other end.
A longer service obligation, and it wasn't guaranteed that I'd stay in communications.
Right.
Could have been infantry.
They needed second lieutenants over,
right.
In
And
Vietnam.
began to hear those stories, and I wasn't anxious to do
Okay.
that.
So let's back up a little now. Let's go to the actual training that you're getting with radios and so forth. What does that consist of?
That, once we got out of the RTO, which was pretty basic, radio protocol and whatnot, went into teletype, it was a little bit more technical in terms, radios had to take 156 steps to get them all turned up and turned on and warmed up. And then you had your Morse code. So all of that you had to qualify with Morse code. You had to get certain scores in your tests to be able to advance to the school and also to get rank. I considered going to one more school, which would be guaranteed E5 status coming out. But by the time I was getting sick of being in school.
Okay. What kinds of people were training alongside you? Were they these people with a lot of education, or were they mostly just out of high school like you?
Probably both. I remember in basic, one of the guys, the 4 guys in my room, he was an aeronautics engineer. Got drafted, he was 25, just under the 26 limit, got drafted, and got assigned to infantry. And he, short little guy, I was surprised he qualified to get in, and he went storming down to the captain's office and said, "This is asinine, this is just crazy." And they did get him switched. They got him switched to White Sands Missiles Proving Grounds. And they had offered him a commission, but he did not want to stay in an extra year. He felt that's too much time away from his field.
Right.
It could ruin his career. So we had some that were higher educated, some not. Although I do remember getting teased somewhat because of it won't have been my level of education, I don't think, because I don't recall that many people hadn't graduated from high school. Got more because I was a vocal Christian, so I got razzed about that, but I also got respected for that way. Some of the guys, so that didn't present a problem.
Okay. Now, when you're in basic training, you're pretty much in the base the whole time. You're not going out into town or things like that.
For the first few weeks, probably about a little over halfway through, we got our first pass. Supposedly you have to earn your pass through the IG inspection process. But I think they planned it so you got your first weekend pass after you had your judo training, your pugil stick training. Because I remember half the guys came back getting beat up. They thought they were really something. They thought they were hot stuff, and they'd go get drunk for the first time in several weeks, and then you get the crap kicked out of them. So it's come back. I went to my brother's house. I spent a lot of my downtime at my brother's place.
Okay. Now, once you're in the advanced training, then they loosen up a little bit more, right?
Loosen up quite a bit, yeah. Yeah, most weekends were were free.
Okay. So what would you do there in Georgia when you had free time?
Well, there's not a whole lot to do. You're right there where the Masters is played, but I knew nothing about golf. Augusta,
Yeah.
Georgia. A lot of people refer to that as the armpit of the world. It's not a whole lot going on in Augusta. Of course, it's a military town. I wasn't interested in a lot, the type of stuff. They had, there was one Christian group that had kind of a ministry going to soldiers when they were in Augusta. So I spent some time volunteering with them and whatnot. Made some friendships.
All right. Now, how long, did you wind up spending in Augusta, including the time, I guess, when you were sick and so forth?
I'm going to say it was probably about 4 months.
Okay. So when did you finish that?
I must have finished up in August.
Okay. And that's
because I had about a month back home between that and shipping out to Vietnam.
okay. So that's now 1969.
Yeah.
Now, when you were going through training and things at this point, especially while you were at Augusta, were you paying any attention to the news and what was happening in Vietnam?
Somewhat. I was becoming more aware, and then some of the other people that had been there, people that trained us, we realized that there was more and more disappointment that everybody in the Army was not sold on what we were doing in Vietnam. So we were getting more of that because recently going through some of my letters, my wife kept every letter that I wrote. I've been going through some of those and realized that I was, reporting back to her. I didn't notice that I had an opinion on it yet. I thought some of the stuff was silly, some of the stuff was nonsense that it has going through. They're obviously trying to psych us up. I remember writing that they're trying to make a killer out of me. That type of thing. But I hadn't had a lot of, coming from Western Michigan, you didn't have a lot of that anti-Vietnam, a lot of protest mentality going on yet at that time.
Right. Okay. So you're sort of aware of it, but it's not in the your focus at that point.
It wasn't becoming part of my psyche yet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now you go back home for a month. What was it like to go back home after all that time in the Army at that point?
It wasn't too strange. I'd been home on a couple short leaves.
Okay.
Happened that my fiance, my girlfriend at the time, she was not home. She was elsewhere on a summer thing that she was involved in. So a good buddy of mine and me took a little road trip, of all places, to Iowa. It wasn't Iowa and Minnesota. So I spent some time with close friends.
Okay.
There was a little bit of anxiety going on then, but not a whole lot. I had no idea what I was getting into.
Okay. All right. Now, what's the process for getting you to Vietnam? Your leave is up. Now what happens?
Shipped to Fort Lewis and on hold status. Had no idea when we were going to ship out. We didn't go as a unit like they do nowadays. You went as an individual, got assigned to a unit there. So you just kind of hung around. It was probably, now if I read through those letters, I'll probably know for sure, but probably close to a week, not knowing when I was going and just waiting around, getting, new issue of different uniform fatigue, camouflage fatigues and boots and that type of stuff.
Yeah. Now, were you confined to the base?
I don't think so. But I don't remember wandering around. I had no place to go.
Right. Well, there's a lot of stories about people who went to the depot at Oakland, where a lot of guys processed through, and there was a lot of concern about people leaving and not coming back. But you didn't really have that impression.
I don't recall. I didn't have any place to go, so I just stayed on base.
Okay. All right. And then how do they get you then to Vietnam from there?
We flew United.
Okay. And do you remember what route you took? You go by Alaska?
I believe we went through Alaska, and we stopped also Okinawa and Guam and Hawaii. Actually got off the plane in Hawaii, got a lay. Lay and a kiss and got back on the plane. You know, I think back, I don't know why we had so many stops since this, and I was kind of surprised it was a commercial flight.
But was it a regular commercial flight, or was it just a chartered
It
plane?
was a chartered commercial.
Right.
We had stewardesses on.
Yeah.
United stewardesses. It was a United flight, but it was all guys going to Nam.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because usually you'd go to Hawaii or Alaska, and you'd go to Okinawa or Guam, but you had them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems likely there that happened that way, because that was how you remembered it, was you had all of these places, and that was kind of okay. Where do you land in Vietnam? Were you outside of Saigon, or were you at Cam Ranh or somewhere else?
Cam Ranh Bay.
Okay. All right. What was your first impression of Vietnam when you got there?
Oh crap! What have I gotten myself into? You know, but it was interesting. Cameron, you're coming as a newbie, you know that, but you're also seeing guys walking around in their swimsuits and surfboards on Cam Ranh Bay. So, but they had what they called P training for a week, and that's what Cam Ranh Bay was to me. And that we didn't have this kind of training back in stateside. Well, I wasn't infantry or one thing, but even basic, we didn't have this kind of training.
So what were you doing in this training?
We're going out and doing mock-up patrols, and we had, I just recall that we had some people that were very experienced. I don't know why they were in that training with us. We had a couple Green Beret that apparently the Green Beret was coming out of Vietnam at that time, but people that didn't have enough time were being reassigned to other units.
Oh.
So we had a couple Green Beret, and they knew what they were doing. They had stories. They just told the stories to scare us, and we hadn't been assigned to units yet.
Okay. Now, I mean, did the heat affect you, or was that not different from Georgia? Or?
I don't recall being impressed one way or the other with the heat. It was hot, tropical, but
Okay.
I don't recall that it affected me negatively in any way.
Now, at what point do you find out what unit you're going to?
It was probably during that week sometime, and yeah, it had to have been, because I remember him giving us this story about the 101st and why we were not wearing camouflage patches and this type of thing, and giving us a history, or the rah-rah thing about the 101st, you know.
Oh, were they telling you that at Cam Ranh Bay, or was that after?
That would have been at Cam Ranh Bay.
Okay. All right. So you're being assigned to the 101st, and now what unit? Now, did you get a specific unit assignment at Cam Ranh Bay, or were you just going to be sent to the 101st and then you'd find out more there?
I'm assuming I got a specific unit assignment there because we flew us up to our units, and it's at that time. First, I got assigned to 101st, and I'm not air Warrant qualified. You are now, son.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know what air mobile was. And then I got assigned to an infantry unit. Okay. I'm not infantry. You are now, son. That's when I realized that, okay, so much for enlisting because I can get into the MOS I want. They had a slot in my unit, which was a headquarters unit, for a teletype operator. Not important, I didn't have teletype equipment. They wouldn't have any use for it. But I filled that slot.
All right. So now, how do they get you from Cam Ranh Bay up to your unit?
Maybe flew C-130.
Okay, so now you're in a military transport. And do you know where you flew to? Was it Camp Eagle or Camp Evans? Or
Probably, and no, it was one of the two. I'm not sure.
Well,
exactly.
Eagle is sort of the divisional headquarters,
Yeah.
and that's a bigger airport.
Yeah, I'm familiar with both of them, but I'm not sure which one that we came into.
All right. So you go up there. And now, what specific unit now were you assigned to?
Headquarters Company, 1st of the 501st.
Okay.
At LZ Sally.
All right. And was your okay? And so your job officially was teletype operator,
That
but
was
they didn't have the teletype
my
equipment.
MOS.
Yeah. But you said there was a slot in the company for someone to do that.
There's a slot for communications people. So
Okay.
at LZ Sally, because it's big enough, we had some communication equipment. I remember doing my shifts in little hot box. Would have been like a storage container unit that they converted, and they had radio equipment in there, and we'd do our shifts in there just listening.
Okay. Now, what was the terrain like around LZ Sally? Was this near the coast or was it up in the hills?
It wasn't in the hills. It was fairly close to Highway 1, so
Okay.
it's not too far from the coast.
Right. Okay. And what kind of reception did you get when you joined the unit? I mean, what happens once you get up to where they are?
Not much of a reception. When we got there, they had a memorial service of 26 guys that had been lost. And I don't remember what it was. I remember it seemed like somebody had said it was a result of Hamburger Hill, but it couldn't have been right. Timing wasn't right, I don't think.
Well, Hamburger Hill was in the summer, so...
And I would have gotten there around mid-September.
Yeah, but it's possible, because I'm not sure they had anything really big after that.
They were saying we were replacements for 26 guys that had been
Yeah,
lost.
yeah, and that is quite possible. All right. And I guess, was that kind of a sobering thing to walk into, or?
It was. Yeah, not a reality check.
Okay. Now, how long did you stay at Sally?
My memories of time are I just don't have, they're very vague. I'm guessing it was several months.
Okay. So you do have an extended phase there.
Yeah, and once in a while we would go out in the field. Our commander had, what do they call them, cooks and clerks squad. He wanted them to have experience, so he'd send them out in the field. After a while, they realized that was really a dumb move because we didn't have a clue what we were doing, and just causing, more, not only hassles, but risking other people's lives because we didn't know what we were doing.
Okay. So what was your basic job there? I mean, you said you were in this box. You're basically in a container and...
In the radio and doing some, I had, because of my MOS, it came with a top secret crypto clearance. So I did some work there, and I ended up getting assigned to a village up in Quang Tri area. And I was the only other American there. There was a Canadian doing the same thing. We were listening to radios. But once in a while, we would go out on patrol with an ARVN unit, which was kind of strange. And they'd go out in ambushes. I remember they had we were in a little housing situation, and we had a mama-san that was cooking for us. Remember that? Basically, we had some other guys here. Picked up some Vietnamese. Unfortunately, I've lost it all. I had no idea I could use this stuff later on. Remember, there was a minefield that was next to it because we placed some ball there. If a ball went in there, we didn't go get it. Remember, when the guys would go out and patrol, the ARVN guys would go out and patrol or ambush. They'd go out there, set up an ambush, you'd take a radio with them, and they'd turn on and listen to music because they didn't want to have contact. So I remember thinking, why are we here? These guys don't. And also getting more and more the message, they really don't want us here. They put up with the French for what, 50 years or something. They've been occupied, and and we'd go out on the road, and we never knew who to trust. At that time, never knew what the enemy looked like. So anybody that was squatting down could be hiding a weapon. Didn't trust kids. That was probably something that impacted me most. Couldn't trust anybody. And holding a weapon on a child, that, any psychological impact, that's probably the worst for me.
Sure. Okay. Now, you said you were listening. Who or what were you listening to or for?
I don't recall what we were listening to. Just there in case, I don't know if we were actively listening to something or just being there in case they had to get a hold of us for something.
Okay.
Because I don't remember making notes and writing down and stuff and we weren't trying to pick up like enemy communications.
Okay.
And whatnot. I don't think it was that.
All right. And did you have somebody, a Vietnamese person who was assigned to you, or your translator or anything like that?
There were others there, living there. And yeah, I don't know the nature of their unit and whatnot, but I was there in that situation probably at least for a couple months. And that allowed a lot of freedom, because that allowed once in a while I would go back to LZ Sally, but I'd go back on my own. You know, if we had Jeep access or something, we'd find a way to get back there, and which was very unusual. People usually never left the LZ on their own, because they had whatever entertainment or what we needed there.
Okay. So you're in a position to actually observe sort of daily life of the Vietnamese population there. I mean, so you got the impression that they didn't want you there, and you were suspicious of things. Were there any incidents? Did anybody get attacked, or?
There was one specifically. Well, actually, there were a couple. But during that period, I would be going down to Way once in a while, and with somebody else. And remember one time driving through Way, always on the alert for thievery, basically, nothing else. Like we'd never hold your hand out the window if you had a watch on your arm or something like that. And I remember going through a crowd that was in the street, and we assumed it was a funeral procession or something that was going down the street, and we were just kind of inching our way through, and suddenly things turned nasty. We had a can of gas thrown against our windshield of the Jeep. We were in an open Jeep. And up front, we realized somebody had torches. And I was not driving. Ski, my good buddy in Vietnam, was driving, and he just hit reverse. To this day, I don't know how he didn't run anybody over. I don't think he ran anybody over. He just hit reverse in Florida to get out of there. And that was kind of the wake-up call. They don't want us here, you know, because these are supposed to be friendlies. They were, apparently it was a protest against our military presence there. And that's probably one of the turning points for me when I started to become more cynical. You know, I was a good little boy from Holland, Michigan. You know, we weren't cynical about anything. We were obedient and whatnot. We didn't protest. I was becoming more and more cynical.
Okay, but you didn't have trouble with the VC sniping at you, or do you have mortar attacks or other things like that?
We did an LZ Sally. You know, once in a while. It's one of the duties you'd have. You have guard duty, and you had to be careful for that, and you just learn to recognize the difference between what sounded like incoming and outgoing. And
Okay, but while you were out in this village, and so there was you and what was a Canadian doing there?
you know, I don't know. Canada had some forces there. They had very limited forces, but they did have some forces there. And his training had been language training, so he was pretty fluent in Vietnamese.
Okay, so he could talk to them anyway.
Yeah.
And you were at that point learning a little bit yourself.
Yeah, I was picking up some words, and we had more freedom, so I'd get out in the village and get out and hit the black market. Had some stuff that you could get on the black market. Like, got a real nice reel-to-reel tape recorder that fit in a briefcase. And I picked up a 45 on the black market.
Okay. Now, I guess there would have been a lot of other things for sale as well that were maybe not such good ideas.
Never did the drug scene.
Yeah.
It was very common, especially marijuana. Very, very common every place. I never checked to see how the guys got it, where the sources were or whatnot. I didn't do drugs, so the guys knew it. I didn't drink, didn't do drugs. I wasn't pressured to join them.
Okay. All right. And was there prostitution around?
Oh, yeah. And there were, at your bigger LZs, there were massage areas. I think probably the idea behind there is to make prostitution safe. for guys.
Yeah, I mean, there are some units that had doctors who regularly inspected women in certain places and things like that.
At LG Sally, I don't think we had that, and I don't think there was any place close enough for the guys, a town close enough for guys could have gone off base. I don't.
Okay, so the things that are going on, but you're basically keeping on the straight and narrow at this point. There's certain advantages to being from Holland.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
There's naivety that went with it, but it's also protection.
Okay. Now, what was the weather like while you were at Sally or in the village? Was this between monsoons or during them?
I remember experiencing both the hot and the rainy season there, and there were times where we would get sent out onto a fire base. And I remember my first experiences being in trying to put shelter houses together, basically being in the mud. It was miserable.
Okay. Now the period when your first station is sort of at or near Sally and the village or in Sally, and so that's basically most of the end of 1969 when you're doing that?
Right.
Okay.
Right. If I recall, I still was at Sally over Christmas.
Okay. Yeah. What do they do for Christmas in Vietnam?
We didn't do anything. We had a little bit better meal, I think. But I had a shift in the hot box. I remember I did have a shift in the hot box on Christmas because I remember writing about it. It was lonely.
Okay.
Well, I guess we're depressed, feeling homesick.
Now they call it a hot box. Did it have an air conditioner?
No.
Oh, okay. So the equipment, they didn't worry about the equipment overheating or anything like that?
The equipment, well, all had little fans on it, as the computers do now.
All right. Now, so at a certain point then, does your unit move? You go someplace else from Sally?
At one point, our unit did. We moved down to Phu Bai. I have to look at my letters and stuff to recall when that was. But that was a major change from an LZ to a larger base.
Yeah.
Where they had, they had NCO clubs and whatnot, and enlisted clubs, and they had the massage parlors, and pretty much it was self-contained. Air Force Base across the street from us. And,
okay. So were you doing the same work there as you had been at Sally, or was it there were different things?
No, then I was doing more work with crypto. Spent a lot of time delivering codes to different units. That's why I was out a lot. That's also why I was at Ripcord doing a code run. Sometimes I would spend a couple weeks at a time on a fire base, and then be kind of listening to radios.
Okay.
Do communications, but it was not. I was not on any one fire base for a long period of time, except for Sally was in LZ and Phu Bai. So actually, I spent a lot of time, more time out in the field than most people in a headquarters company, but a lot less time out in the field than if I would have been one of the infantry companies.
Okay. Now, do you remember the names of any of these places that you went to when you were on Ripcord at a certain point?
Well, I remember in Normandy, I remember Eagle, I remember Evans. Those names all ring a bell with me.
Yeah. Well, Eagle and Evans are the big bases. Eagle is Phu Bai, and Camp Evans that was where a brigade headquarters was.
Is that down in Danang?
No, it was still up.
Up in I-Corps?
Yeah, still in I-Corps.
Okay.
Because that was the 3rd Brigade, 101st main base, and so a lot of the infantry who served at Ripcord were based. That was their home base.
Okay, I must have touched base there for some reason, whatever.
Yeah, well,
I did a lot of moving
Right.
around as an individual, going, delivering things.
Okay. Now you say delivering. So basically, are you taking a little booklet or something like that with the
Little booklet with the codes, and sometimes the code equipment, the actual machine,
Okay.
would be delivering.
So why would you stay on a base? And were you the guy who would then operate it, or?
That's a good question. No, I wasn't the guy that would set it up and whatnot. I remember some cases where I'd be at the radios on a base, but not sure. I remember one particular base where they actually had me dig a big as just on top of the hill, typical fire base, dig a big hole, and they brought in the Jeep, because the Jeep had the radio equipment in it. And they got that in, it had the sandbag all around it, whatnot, so we could make calls, the Mars link up. And I remember being with guys in the middle of the night and helping make calls back home.
Okay. So explain how that system worked. How was that going on there?
That was basically a link, kind of a link, almost like a ham radio link to the U.S. where you could call and it'd go through somebody else. It's kind of like if you're a ham radio operator now and you're connecting to another ham radio operator and he's calling somebody else on the landline, then he's the in-between person for you. So the Mars link was kind of like that. I remember calling my girlfriend, my fiance at that time, and it was the same. You had to say over when you were done, so they knew when to actually make the switch. It was the old style where they're pulling out cords, plugging them in someplace else, so you could communicate. So that was interesting. That was different. Actually doing something a little bit more I was trained for, but that was because the particular commander that was an idea he had. Well, let's put our Jeep out here and let the guys call home.
Okay. Now, did the Jeep drive out there, or did somebody fly it in?
It was taken out by Huey. Not by Huey, by a Chinook.
Chinook, okay.
And,
So you have a helicopter coming in to deliver a Jeep onto a base, and you put the Jeep in a hole and to protect it, I guess, or whatever, and then just use it, then you lift it out again.
And then a while later, after you've been there for a while, and you lift it all out again.
Okay. Now, when you were actually out in some of these fire bases that were really kind of out in the field, so in Normandy or Ripcord, someplace like that, I mean, would you take enemy fire or attacks, or was it quiet while you were in these places?
My experiences were mainly quiet. I don't recall any situation when I was on a base where we were coming under fire.
Okay.
I know that's unusual. That's why I have trouble relating with some of the Ripcord people, because a lot of them came under fire quite often. But I don't recall that. Like I say, I have very few memories. I've got to check through those letters to see if I'm just blocking stuff up. I don't think so. I don't recall having anything horrifically traumatic occur in my experience in Vietnam.
Okay. So when you were out in the fire bases, was that pretty much just like being on Sally, or?
No, it was smaller, fewer comforts. Didn't have things like the showers and whatnot. You'd have to dig in. If we were lucky, we'd get the Quonset type metal things that we, put over the hole that we dug in. It was a little bit more comfortable than just having your tin halves that you snap together.
Okay. Do you remember when you went to Ripcord?
No, but it would have had to have been, and I don't know how many times I went in and out of Ripcord, and I don't know if I stayed overnight.
Okay.
There when I go in and out. It would have had to have done with communications in the with the crypto. The only reason I remember it because my door gunner gave me a call late last night. This is a number of years ago, and probably 12 or 14 years ago, and just asked, "Is this Jeffrey R. Stam?" Well, nobody refers to me as Jeffrey R. Stam, and he asked me if I remember what I was doing on the day. I think it was June 7, 1970. This is really weird. I say, I believe I was getting shot down in a helicopter. I said, "Who is this?" Well, it's a door gunner. And for whatever reason, he was just seeking out different people. Maybe he was doing it on behalf of the Ripcord Association. And then he started explaining Ripcord to me. I didn't know anything about it other than the name of a fire base. It was one of the call signs for one of our commanders.
Okay.
That's all I recall about the term Ripcord.
All right. Now, talk about the incident that this guy's calling you about. So what happens on June 7th, 1970?
That I was doing a code run, delivering some new code, and also anxious to, if I could, I'd like to get back to Phu Bai, much more comfortable than staying out in Ripcord where the fire base is. So I remember there was a helicopter taking off. It happened to be a battalion commander's helicopter, and I had a little bit of clout because I had this mission. I said, I need this helicopter before it goes back. We need to make a run out, make a delivery. It was a delivery out to a LERP unit. Making that delivery, we had made contact, and we were hovering over a river because there were trees and whatnot in the way. It was a thick jungle setting. So we're hovering over a river, and I had my code in a sandbag that I was going to drop to him. I very clearly remember that. He was standing waiting there, and as I was getting ready to drop it, suddenly he just drops in the water. And I remember strange thoughts going through my mind. First was, what in the world are you doing? You know, not a good time to take a swim. I want to get out of here. I want to go back to home base and get comfortable. And then there was a captain who also grabbed a ride on the chopper, and I remember him leaning over on me. And I turned around thinking, what in the world, dude, get off of me. And I turned around and noticed at that time about half of the top of the helicopter is gone. It's just missing. We had taken a direct hit by an RPG. I had no clue. And my next thought, and the door gunner on that side leaned over to look at us, and my next thought was, what are you doing still there? That's, you know, and we had lost our hydraulic, but the pilot had managed to get us up and away from that area. And at that time, I'm on the radios trying to call in a mayday. Well, obviously the pilot's probably trying to do that too, but I didn't do that. And we lost our hydraulics after we'd gotten away. I have no idea of knowing if it was a click or a half click or we'd gotten away from the situation. And when hydraulics were gone, the helicopter was dropped.
Right.
Straight down. Because we were in rather thick jungle, and I think it was triple canopy jungle, I'm not sure about that, it kind of cushioned the fall as the helicopters came
So the
through.
rotors are still spinning at the point when you're going down?
I am assuming they're still spinning.
So that maybe some of that
we're going
slows
down,
things
and
down too.
I'm on a radio, I'm trying to figure it out, I'm trying to brace myself at the same time. And we're going down. This is all very surreal. It's happening. And I remember after we hit the ground, the door gunner on my side quickly jumped out, and to this day I don't know if he saw it or not, but the helicopter blade came swinging down, and he bent down, just came over his head, and I don't know if he saw it or if he just luckily bent down at the right time. So we all got off. There would have been 6 of us because 2 door gunners, 2 pilots, and
So
Captain and I.
this was a Huey that you
This
were?
was a Huey.
Okay, because I guess you had mentioned it being an officer's helicopter.
Battalion commanders.
And sometimes they use loaches, they use smaller ones.
This
was a Huey.
and it had a full bank of radios and crypto equipment on it.
Okay.
So they dismounted the 50s on the side of the helicopter to go set up a perimeter. Because they knew what the situation was. They knew that right now that when the ambush took place, if they saw the helicopter go down, they knew that was a bigger prize than maintaining contact with the unit they were with. And it was getting towards dusk. My concern was the code, because I had held on to the sandbag, but when we hit the ground, the sandbag fell on, opened up. So I was running around picking up all these papers, the code. So I had been wired to protect that.
Okay.
I wasn't thinking this through. That just came naturally. My instinct was I've got to protect this code. So I got the code, and then we went back and shot up the radios. Because pretty sure that this helicopter is going to get captured, pretty sure that this equipment is valuable, and we can't let it fall into enemy hands.
Right. Okay. Now the helicopter itself, was the captain killed? The fellow
No.
who slumped over on you was wounded?
No, it turned out that I had the worst injuries, and I did not know I had any injuries, which is so surprising. After they established that, then I don't know if the pilot ever got a communications through. I don't think so. I think they began to miss the battalion commander's helicopter. So that was a good thing. I had the right helicopter.
Yeah.
And so they sent somebody out looking, and they couldn't get a larger helicopter in by us. They could get a loach in. So it took 3 trips coming back and forth to get that in. And probably, I said I haven't had horrific experiences, but it was traumatic. I was scared.
Okay. What kind
I
of?
was scared of being captured.
Yeah.
So I was the last guy out, because I thought I was the one that was not wounded. We were getting wounded guys out first. So I was last guy. Well, there were 2 of us waiting for the last run to get picked up by Loach, and obviously we did shortly before it started to get dark. But got taken to a field hospital, and that might have been, I want to say, I'm not sure if I was Evans or Eagle. I have no, but again, I was still focused. All my adrenaline was focused on this code. I had the code with me, and I needed to get it into the right hands.
Yep.
So it wouldn't be compromised. It's still good code. And they looked around. I wouldn't give it up to anybody. And finally, they found a major, a communications officer, and I actually made the dude sign a piece of paper that I was giving this code to him. And by that time, they were cleaning up the triage room and whatnot. There was a medic there, and he had seen me from behind. He said, "Have you been looked at?" I said, "No, but I think I'm okay. I don't think there's any problem." He said, "Oh, let me check you over." So he had me sit on the bed there, and then he started cutting off my fatigue pants. I noticed that my fatigue pants are all shredded, and they're all full of blood. And then I started to get a little bit woozy, and the adrenaline started to calm down. What happened? Started to hurt a little bit, but they had too much shrapnel for them to deal with at that little field unit there. So they medevaced me to Phu Bai. So my commander and my best buddy, whose place I'd taken that day to go out and this run, came over. I met them come over to see me. It was getting later, and because they also had shrapnel in the back of my head, they didn't feel that they wanted to operate on there. So they sent me to Danang. So I was getting sent all over. I was getting late at night at Danang, but the only thing I remember there is by that time I really had a shake. So I was trembling, almost in shock, and I had a nurse, and there back then they're following protocol. She had her white uniform on, even had them with hats, nursing hats, and she is trying to take blood or trying to put an IV in or something. And she told me, she says, "You got to try and hold still so I can get this in." So I did everything I could to be still and hold it. And just as she was pulling something out, I kind of sprung, and I had seared blood straight up and down her old uniform. I remember feeling so bad about ruining her crisp white uniform by squirting blood all over the place. And next thing I remember, they're telling me to count backwards, because I'm going under. I count backwards from 100. I think I got to about 98. And then next thing I remember, I was waking up groggily. Some colonel was pinning a Purple Heart in my pajamas.
Okay. Now, was that injury enough to end your time in Vietnam, or do you get sent back to your unit?
Both.
Okay.
Remember them telling me, they were asking what kind of things I was involved in. I told them I was a runner. You're not going to be running again. You're not going to be water skiing again. But after a few weeks, they tried sending me back to my unit. And in fact, it seems to me I remember going back out again. Because I did. I remember telling ski again. I took another one of his things. He says, "I've got to get back up, or I'm not going to ever get back up. If I don't get back, I see, look, falling off a horse. You got to get back on. I got to get back up, or never, by developing infection, a staph infection, and they didn't give me much information. I remember them suddenly getting concerned they were going to send me out again and putting me in the back of the plane all by myself. And I wondered, okay, what's going on? I had no idea what a staph infection is, what's going on. And I got down there, and I think that was down to Danang again, and they sent me. And I got back, and I must have gotten there when they really had a lot of people come in because it was chaos. And it took a long time. Finally, somebody looked at me and said, no problem with you. You don't have staph infection or whatnot. So they released me. But I had to find my own way back up to Phu Bai, to my unit. And I just remember being very confused. I had to find a place to stay that night, a place to bed down. I remember somebody was watching a movie, but it had captions. I wasn't interested in that. And so I was, okay, how am I going to get back to my unit? Got back to my unit, and the doctor up there was furious. He was furious that I got sent back. So they sent me out again. And I spent, in 2.5 months, counting the little MASH unit and everything, I was in 14 different hospitals. I'd been in the Army, in the Air Force, in a Navy hospital ship. Air Force, by the way, by far has the best food and best treatment. Spent a couple weeks on USS Sanctuary. I just patrols up and down the coast, and once in a while we'll go to the Philippines. And
Was this all with the infections, or was this including?
This is all basically because I think they didn't know what to do with me. That was on the hospital ship. I had malaria kick in.
Okay.
Now that's explained to me that malaria can lie latent in your system unless a trauma kicks in and triggers it. I guess getting wounded was enough of a trauma to kick it in. So I remember being in this bay full of people are sick, and the way they treated it was they soaked your pillowcase in ammonia. And it must have worked, because it broke the fever. And I remember being on the ship. By that time I knew, okay, I'm going home. I just don't have any idea when. And I'm really getting homesick, just want to get out of here. I'm not worried about going back out in the combat or anything. I just want to get home. And then I got sent to Japan for a month in Yokohama at the hospital there. I was ambulatory. I was a patient the whole time, but I was ambulatory. I could go out in the evening, say weekend passes, going to Tokyo and whatnot. So I volunteered in the reception area where they were bringing patients. I would do vitals and worked a burn unit for a little while. I tried working the burn unit for a little while. I couldn't take that. That was just a horrible experience. The guys that were in the burn units. And then again, I wasn't getting any communication from home because letters weren't keeping up. I was moving too much. Nothing was keeping up with me. And they weren't. I was writing, but didn't know when I would be leaving. I knew that some people were leaving. They were getting shipped back. I never knew why didn't they send me back to Great Lakes. That's what they normally do with people. And I think it was because I didn't need treatment. I just need processing. So finally, one day I got the word, you're leaving. Pack up. Didn't have any time to let anybody know. And got all my stuff together. And I was in Japan during Bonadore also. That was an interesting experience. Bonadore is their celebration of the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It was the 25th anniversary. That was an interesting time to be in Japan. But I got sent back, and just not with my unit again. I felt like I was getting snuck back in the country. Didn't go through normal processing and whatnot, so I keep on telling you, the Army, I never got my brass band, I never got my steak dinner when I came back. They only and gave me a ticket to go back home. Sent me to the airport. I think it was LA. So I must have got shipped back into.
Okay. So you went from Japan back to Vietnam and then?
No, I went to
okay.
Japan, back to the States.
Oh, just the States from there, okay.
I-
Okay. Now, you mentioned malaria kicked in. Hadn't they given you anti-malarial
Oh, yeah.
medications and stuff when you were in Vietnam?
Yeah, we took these horse pills once a day, I think, and people weren't always faithful in taking them, especially if you're moving about as much as I was. And,
Okay. So did you miss some doses along the way?
I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
if I was regularly taking them, if I'd been a good doobie about that or not. That's,
All right. Now, when you think, and you mentioned you had at least one good friend in Vietnam, this fellow Ski. Was he sort of the only guy you got to know? Or?
couple guys. One was Larry Stockdale, and when I was back at Fort Lewis, he and his wife got posted there, and we became quite close at Fort Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
And Ski, I never heard from again after I got sent back to the hospital. About a year or so ago, one of his kids must have found me on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
and it was asking if I was so-and-so. I think they probably saw my name on one of the 101st rosters or something, because I belonged to two organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, I'm sure, I figured out it was the same Ski. I'm sure my dad would like to hear from you. So I contacted them and whatnot. I never heard anything back. So I haven't heard.
Okay. Now, were these guys that served specifically in the headquarters company, or were they doing the same work that you were doing? Or?
Yes, they were both in the communications.
So about how many people do you think you actually got to know it all well while you were over there?
I remember a couple people. One very interesting individual from New York. He was there. One of these situations, the judge gave him a choice: go in the army, go to jail. He chose the army. His name was Kish, was his nickname. Kind of the hippie type.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I didn't develop a lot of. I'm a bit of an introvert myself anyway,
Okay.
so I didn't develop a lot of close relationships. If I did, I don't remember them. It was interesting because the letters I've been reading through my basic training, I talk about close relationships. I don't remember these people at all. And I'm really surprised. I go, I had close friends on there. Don't recall that. So I've got every letter I wrote. Apparently, I wrote very, very faithfully.
Mm-hmm.
And I got letters, and she kept them all. I've got them all organized, but I haven't read through them yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping to go back to Vietnam with a group that's kind of like these honor flight type things.
Yeah.
But I want to try and remember a little bit more about my time there.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's likely back in the file drawers somewhere in the back of your memory, and some of these things may get triggered.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when you were on the big bases, did you notice morale or discipline problems, either with drugs or race or drinking or?
Morale problems. You heard the stories about second lieutenants getting taken out and whatnot. They didn't know what they were really doing, but they came and very impressed with their butter bars or shaken bakes. So you hear those stories. I didn't have any direct experience with any of that. Morale problems, some drugs, more problem with drugs on some of the fire bases.
Okay.
There are a couple of situations where people were doped up and they were firing on friendlies, type of thing. One of the reasons why I've never been able to believe that even that marijuana is okay, that it's safe. Because I've seen what it does. So it's.
But they're actually smoking it on the fire bases and while they were on duty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's a pattern, varies a lot depending on who you talk to about that.
It is very readily available.
Okay. Yeah. And on the bases, would the black soldiers segregate themselves, or were there any racial tensions that you ever noticed?
Never noticed it.
Okay.
And come from Western Michigan, especially from Holland, didn't have until I went in the Army, I didn't have much experience at all with African Americans. But the little bit I did have was never been really negative. So that wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue that I took note of. People there, I think, had tendency to realize, yeah, we're pretty much all in the same game here. We can't afford to play this racist card.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a stereotype about Vietnam, and it shows up in some accounts. So I just asked to see, well, did you see that or not? And, you know, and that's kind of part of why you do a lot of these interviews, is to kind of get the data that way too. All right. Well, you think back to the time you spent in Vietnam, are there other particular memories or things that stay with you that you haven't brought into the story yet?
One, I vaguely mentioned that, you know, holding my M16 on a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard. And another one, I spent a night in a brig. Ski again. Ski and I had adventures together. That's
Okay.
probably why I remember ski so well. We were supposed to get from point A to point B, and we had to do it before nightfall. And I'm assuming it had to do with crypto equipment or code again. And he was driving, and we ran an MP. They tried to flag us down, and we ran past him because we were hurt. We didn't have time to stop, you know, because gates closed at sundown, and we would not get in, and we were being a pickle then. And we had a full board colonel telling us this has to go there, and that was not a good move. So they put a roadblock up further down the road, and they got us stopped, and we got things straightened out. And I said, okay, this is, you know, contact this colonel.
Mm-hmm.
Find out. He was livid with them that they'd stopped us. Well, of course they stopped us. It was dumb for us to do. So we you know, they had no place to do. So I tell people I spent the night in a brig, but the door was open. They had no place to put us. and sleeping cots there, so we sent there. And so that was our memory. Another memory was Ski was very hot-headed, and we were driving someplace, and he had received a cassette from his girlfriend. With some songs on it. Maybe she might have been singing, but and we were going through a rather crowded area, and a Papasan went out in front of him, got hit. And to this day, we don't know if it was set up or not to stop us. But we stopped. You know, right away a crowd started developing, and while we were stopped doing that, somebody reached in a Jeep and grabbed his cassette player, and he was livid. He grabbed his M6 and he was ready to start shooting. So I was trying to get him calmed down. By then MPs had come, and they realized the crowd was really getting riled. So they just told us, leave. You got to get yourselves out of here because they're getting upset with you now. And they took care of it. So I had a couple of experiences like that. It had nothing to do with combat, really. But
did you ever get any occasion to eat any of the Vietnamese food, or did you always just stick with base rations?
in the village, I'm sure we ate a lot of Vietnamese food. I don't recall much about the experience, disliking it or anything. So it's
okay. Okay. So when do you get back to the States?
a couple weeks before I would have normally gotten back. So it was probably about mid-August.
Okay.
Of 70.
All right. And then you still had some time left on your enlistment at that point?
I did.
Okay. So what did they do with you after you got back? Did you get to go home, or did you?
I went home. I was supposed to go to Germany after Vietnam, but my orders got all messed up because they were trying to find me, process me, whatnot. So I ended up going to Fort Lewis, Washington, 3rd Armored Cav, and since I had rank to get housing, I had a full-time job. I decided to get married. So in 3 weeks' time, we put together a wedding and got married and drove on out to Fort Lewis, Washington. Lived off base in an apartment for a little while, then moved on base when on base housing became available. And I would have had probably about a year and 4 months left, but they were doing early outs for people.
Okay. So you had signed up for a 3-year enlistment? Yeah. Okay.
So I would normally have gotten out in January of 72, but I got out in November 1st of 71.
Okay. So how did you actually spend your time at Fort Lewis?
Did a lot of different things. Again, I had rank. Some Vietnam, they didn't know what to do with me. So I worked in an S2 unit, did a lot of clerk type stuff, Because I was tall, they thought I should be in kind of a traditional honor guard situation where you're dressed in Revolutionary War uniforms and going out there. So it was an easy enough assignment, just kind of biding my time. With the 3rd Armored Camp, I had responsibility for a personnel carrier, so I got to play with a tank a while, and we would take that out in the course once in a while, and sometimes I remember we'd have them at shopping malls, and I'd be sitting there explaining we have Korean vets coming, World War II vets coming. So it was, again, like Vietnam, it was a very diverse experience. My whole time in the Army was very, very diverse, got to do a lot of different things. I considered very strongly re-enlisting. I was offered OCS again. I seriously considered that. But I had something else I wanted to do. I had other career plans I wanted to follow, so I chose not to do that. I have looked back on it multiple times and wished I had sometimes gone to chaplaincy route. I had until age 35 to go back and do that. I've had a couple friends that have done that.
All right. And now at Fort Lewis, do they have a lot of people who were back from Vietnam that were just kind of finishing out their tours, or did you?
Some, but not a lot. A lot of people were short enough, well, if they were drafted, they were probably short enough to get out. If you had less than 6 months, a number of people, in fact, I considered doing it before I got wounded, about upping for another 6 months in Vietnam if I could get a MAC-V assignment, let's say for assignment, a cushy assignment, because that would have allowed me to get out.
So MAC-V being the Military Assistance Command,
Yeah.
basically the big headquarters for the whole
Yeah,
country.
it would have
kind
been
of
away or something. A safer assignment,
Yeah.
then I could have gotten out of the Army a lot earlier. I was interested in getting out of the Army, getting married, going back to school, and this type of stuff.
Okay. All right. So once you are out, now do you go to college, or what do you do next?
Well, my wife is now in school
Okay.
in Washington, because Washington is a wonderful state that if you're a resident there, you get free vocational technical school. So she was going to nurses training, so we couldn't leave yet.
Okay.
And at that time in Washington, they had just killed the SST project. So jobs were scarce. They were really hard to find. You had engineers washing dishes. But I played a vet card and found myself, I was offered 2 jobs, one as a secretary for president of a college. And they said, this is not a male position. I says, you had any candidates that can type over 80 words a minute yet? So I was offered that job, but I was also offered a position in the Washington National Guard, civil service assignment, which is how I ended up back in the National Guard afterwards. So it was a full-time civil service assignment as a kind of a supply room and armory sergeant. So I did that until my wife was done with school, and then I was ready to go to school.
Okay. So where'd you go to school?
I went to Reformed Bible College, which is now Kuyper College.
Did you train for the ministry or something else?
I did. Trained for the ministry. Then I taught for a while at college level. Then I went back to graduate school. Then we went to a mission field in Central America for about 8 years.
So where'd you go in Central America?
I tell people I got my mail in Costa Rica, San Jose, but the nature of my assignment was I had responsibilities for the whole region, so I traveled to 6 countries. First I was on assignment to work with university campuses, which is interesting, doing Christian ministry on a communist university in Nicaragua. That's interesting. We had Danielle Ortega's daughter was involved with us. We kept that quiet at the time. Americas was her name. So we did that for a number of years, and I became field director. And then we came back to the States when our girls were at the age where we thought it was important to get them back here, finish up their education, finish up high school up here. So I did that. And then I was working for developing theological materials for the mission field, so I continued working for our mission board. Then about 25 years ago, I started my own faith-based nonprofit.
And so what does that nonprofit do?
That depends on what country you're in. Here it's kind of almost a pure level counseling type of thing, but it's more looking at spiritual issues. We get a lot of referrals from professional mental health counselors, or sometimes even medical doctors. You know, we're not getting anywhere, and we think this might be something else.
Okay.
They had to be of that worldview first before they would do that. Then we went international. We worked with a lot of orphanages and prisons, different vehicles for the same type of ministry, but using different vehicles. I just retired from that a little over a year ago, but I still travel. I'm traveling as much as I was before. The only difference is I'm not getting a paycheck, so I haven't gotten this retirement thing quite figured out yet.
Okay. Now, do you buy your own tickets, or are you still being
No,
sent by
no,
the
they pay for that.
organization?
In fact, Monday I'll be leaving for Malaysia and India
Okay.
for 10 days. So they cover the expenses, but and I do some volunteering for the VA. I do some writing for another organization. But I'm an adjunct faculty at Cornerstone.
Okay. Now, when you came back from Vietnam, did you have any issues or encounters, either with protesters or with people who look at you funny because you've been in the military?
I did not. Again, Holland,
Yeah.
Michigan's coming back to. I remember I had heard about this. And so when I boarded that plane, when they flew me in serendipitously or almost secretly, I give you a ticket, go on a plane. I remember standing in front of the 747, never seen one before, boarding it. I was just amazed at this got in Chicago. Nobody from my family was coming yet. And I was just a basket case. And I'd gotten out of my uniform right away. I was just told, get out of your uniform. So I did that, and I was nervous, I was shaking, I got a bloody nose, I had my head in one of these locker things, trying to figure out what to do. I was just in a panic, I didn't know what to do. And some guy had compassion on me, he saw I was in trouble, and so he helped me out. I called my brother from Chicago, and he says, I'm back in, can you come and pick me up? And I remember we stopped at one of these oases over the roads, and I got a tray full of milk and a sandwich, and I was shaking so bad that the milk was half gone by the time I got to my table. I was just a basket case for a while.
Do you have any idea why? Was it just...
No, I don't know what set that off. Once in a while, I don't think I ever had PTSD issues. Of course, most people with PTSD don't think they do at first. I still get tremors once in a while, especially when I'm talking about the helicopter incident and whatnot. And I've only had one event where I really had a panic. That's when I was doing missions training in Mexico in a jungle setting for the first time. And we were using old Army issue hammock type things. And it was there over the 4th of July, and the guy who was leading this thing thought he'd surprise us all and have fireworks without letting us know. But they were from another location. So I heard this, and to me, what I was hearing was incoming.
Yeah.
And I panicked. I hit the ground, and more than anything, it hurt my ego. I was very, very embarrassed by it all. But as far as I recall, I haven't had any. You used to have day mirrors, you know, a little bit. But
Yeah. Well, you know, there's things, you know, there's different kinds of, you know, some of the trauma is there, but if you're not having, so those things are, some of them would be PTSD symptoms, but they're not things that are dominating your life or getting in your way. And
like,
it's just a very sporadic kind of thing.
And I didn't have that type of experience in Vietnam, where I wasn't humping every day. I did some humping out in the field, but I never saw anybody get blown up. And I never got into a firefight situation. I've always told people, have asked me, you can always find people, when you're in Vietnam, you could always find others that had it much better than you did, but you could also always find others that had it a lot worse than you did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sometimes PTSD people actually haven't been in a lot of direct combat, but just psychically, whatever situation they were in or the kind of people they were, that's just how they reacted. So it's all over the place.
And one of the things that the ministry I found it works with veterans that have PTSD, working from the spiritual dimension of it, you know, what's involved here.
All right. Now, for yourself, now as you look back at the time that you spent in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you take out of it?
The time was beneficial, it helped me grow up. Even in Vietnam, I'm not sorry I went. It helped me grow up a lot. I wouldn't want to repeat it. I wouldn't wish it on other people. Yeah, I don't have regrets for having, while I was in, I had lots of regrets. But looking back, I don't have regrets for that time. I've always, until recently, last couple of years, avoided veterans groups like the plague, especially Vietnam veterans groups, because they've mellowed quite a bit now.
Yep.
But 20 years ago, I'd watch them. Parades were an excellent example. You'd see the World War II vets trying their best to be in their uniforms, stay in straight lines. Korean vets, same thing.
Yep.
They'd march. The Vietnam vets were always, they'd have their booty caps on, they'd have a bayonet, they'd have grenade pins on it, they had fatigues in a t-shirt, and they'd be ragtag. And my opinion of that, I always thought, they're still living the war. And so I didn't want anything to do with it. So it wasn't until I had some friends of mine really counsel me, encourage me to start wearing my veterans colors, I'd call it. And because it's awkward for Vietnam vets these days. Everybody, the whole country is sorry for how they treat Vietnam vets, and they can't get over apologizing. It's getting old. 15-year celebration to welcome home. Come on, okay, we realize you screwed up. Sorry for it. Let's get on with it. But you know, keep on collecting all these pins that all the congressmen want to hand out and all that. But I started going to the VA. My first experience with the VA was a very negative one. And I didn't want anything to do with this. But a number of years later, through an uncle who went there quite a bit, he said, try it again. So I started doing my medical stuff through the VA because I do have a disability, and found out the VA around here is great. You know, you hear all these horror stories, especially with the new clinic now that they have a decent facility.
Yeah.
They're respectful, they treat you well. You're always going to have some that are complaining about the system. So I volunteer there one day a week because it's time to get back. My foray into the Ripcord Association is the first thing I've done with a veterans group. I joined the VFW, you know, because I'm looking for, okay, how can I get back? And that was finding one that I was comfortable with was a little bit difficult because I wasn't interested in just going someplace that provided a place to get cheaper drinks. I wanted to go to an organization that actually do something. You know, their meetings, I find are very frustrating. It's like being in these secret organizations and the secret handshakes and but you know, being able to do stuff with them where they're helping others, I'm content with that. So I put up with it's like you're back in the military. The meetings, it really is. But
all right. Well, the whole thing makes for pretty good stories. So thanks for taking the time to share it today.
Oh, you're welcome.